Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney was written in 1966. It appeared in Heaney's first major published collection of the same name, which explores childhood experiences of growing up in Northern Ireland, rural life which often involves very hard work, family relationships, and the way in which adult identities are formed. In the poem, the speaker describes how, when he was a child, he used to visit the flax dam to collect the frog spawn that would accumulate there every spring. The first part of the poem focuses on his innocent delight, excitement and fascination with the decaying and smelly flax dam, its abundant wildlife, and his observations of the developing frogs. The second stanza describes his sudden fear and loathing, which is brought on by the seemingly changed characteristics of the frogs. He flees the flax dam, his interest in the natural world never to return. This is a poem exploring how our perceptions of the world alter when we see it through the lens of experience, which we develop in adolescence, as opposed to that of the innocence with which we are born. The very same things which give the speaker pleasure in the first stanza, such as noxious smells, the frogs, their croaking and their frog spawn, fill him with loathing and fear in the second stanza. They haven't changed, though. He has. It's been argued that the poem explores the speaker's adolescent awakening to the realities of sex and reproduction, as symbolised by the frogs. Some further insight is also gained, however, from a 1991 interview with the broadcaster Melvyn Bragg, in which Heaney revealed that the danger found in the countryside in his poetry is a reflection of the troubled and divided community in which he grew up. The threat of violence embodied in the frogs, of which the speaker very suddenly and painfully becomes aware, could also allude, and does so more persuasively in my opinion, due to the use of military imagery in the second stanza, to his growing awareness of the undercurrents of political tensions which would escalate soon after this collection of poems was published, at the end of the 1960s, into a prolonged period of sectarian conflict in Northern Ireland, known as the Troubles. The poem is written in blank verse. It has a bass meter of iambic pentameter, di-dum, 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 di-dum. But there is no rhyme scheme. Heaney uses dense sound patterning techniques, such as alliteration, consonants and assonance, to create interweaving connections between sounds which enhance the poem's rhythm and create a musicality which is at times quite dissonant. There's also extensive use of enjambment throughout, which in the first stanza helps to evoke the almost breathless excitement and enthusiasm the speaker remembers experiencing, while in the second stanza helps to enhance the speaker's sense of panic and powerlessness as he flees the inexorable advance of the frogs. Heaney uses rich and sensuous vocabulary, appealing to the reader's senses of sight, hearing, smell and touch, such as warm thick slobber, clotted water, rank, coarse croaking, and pulsed like sails, sometimes mixing the senses to create synesthetic images, such as strong gauze of sound around the smell, and the air was thick. He also employs a vocabulary that is quite childish, such as best of all, jampotfuls, daddy frog, mammy frog, and farting, to evoke the voice of an adult who is remembering this momentous event and the language in which the memory was forged. This helps to make this event from years ago much more immediate, as we see it through the eyes of the child that he once was, rather than the adult he is now. Heaney also uses words from different semantic fields in different parts of the poem. In the early part of the first stanza, he uses imagery suggestive of wounds, such as festered in the heart and gauze. In the second stanza, he uses military imagery, such as invaded, cocked, and grenades. The title, Death of a Naturalist, is a striking one, as we might expect a poem dealing with the actual death, perhaps in dramatic or tragic circumstances, of a naturalist who is an expert in or student of natural history, such as a zoologist or a botanist. The death referred to, though, is metaphorical rather than literal, although we only find this out after we have read the whole poem. The speaker has ceased to be a naturalist, as the event he experiences causes his childish delight in the natural world to die almost instantaneously. The poem begins, "All year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland." Flax is a plant which is grown for both its seeds and its fibres. The seeds are pressed to make linseed oil, the byproduct of which is used to feed livestock, and the fibres are used to make cloth. A flax dam is a small pond used by the farmer to soften the flax before processing. There's obviously flax that has been left behind, and this has become rotten over the course of the year. The verb festered here literally means that the flax has decayed and become offensive smelling. It does have other definitions as well, though, upon which Heaney may well also be playing. It's primarily used to describe how a wound becomes septic or produces pus. But it also has a metaphorical meaning, relating to the way in which negative feelings or problems get worse under the surface if they are not openly addressed. The use of the word heart to describe the centre of the townland suggests it is being personified and is perhaps hinting at the way in which the grievances of the townspeople on both sides of the sectarian divide are festering beneath the surface. In the flax dam, green and heavy-headed flax had rotted there. Note that even though Heaney does not use end rhyme in this poem, he does use sound patterning, such as the alliteration and assonance here, to create connections between lines. If you look at the ends of the first two lines, you'll notice the repeated initial h sounds in heart and heavy-headed, the assonant short e sounds, and also even the visual, if not aural, similarity with the ea of heart. The flax is weighted down by huge sods, or heavy pieces of turf, intended to keep it under the surface of the water. Conditions are perfect for decomposition. The flax is wet, and daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. The verb sweltered has connotations of discomfort in the excessively hot and humid conditions imposed by the punishing sun. The use of personification here, of both the flax and the sun, is an indication perhaps of how the speaker as a child saw elements of the natural world as characters whose actions were being orchestrated by conscious entities. Although these words have negative connotations, the speaker appears in no way put off by these surroundings. As the plants decompose, they release bubbles of methane, which gargled delicately. The use of the guttural onomatopoeic gargled alongside the adverb delicately is oxymoronic, and conveys the way in which the speaker is not put off by the decay and its stench, but finds it, instead, fascinating and beautiful. Although there is decomposition, the flax dam is also teeming with the life that feeds off it. There are bluebottles, dragonflies, spotted butterflies, and frog spawn. Bluebottles are large, buzzing flies with shiny metallic blue bodies. They feed off rotting material and do therefore have connotations of death. They wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. Gauze is a thin yet strong, transparent fabric with an open weave associated with the dressing of wounds. The poet seems to imagine the buzzing of the flies as an aural thread which weaves itself into a fabric in the air. It is so loud that it appears as though it has an actual substance. This image is synesthetic, mixing the senses of sound, touch and smell. Not only does Heaney create an image of a sound which appears to have substance, but also of an odour, which appears to be kept contained by the buzzing of the flies. This synesthesia is enhanced by Heaney's interweaving of sibilance and internal rhyme in this line. The poem continues. But best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water in the shade of the banks. The metaphor, warm, thick slobber of frog spawn, evokes the thick, frothy saliva that is associated with the drooling of friendly dogs. Introducing this description with, but best of all, suggests a childish fascination with things that are a bit icky, and that the speaker finds the sensation oddly comforting. Heaney uses an evocative simile, like clotted water, to describe the transparent jelly-like texture of the frog spawn. Note the use of enjambment here that helps to evoke the young boy's sense of excitement as though it cannot be kept contained within the constraints of the verse form. The phrase, here, every spring, communicates a sense of ritual enjoyed by the speaker. He looks forward to this every year and goes to collect the frog spawn almost religiously. The alliteration of jampotfuls with jellied enhances the speaker's sense of childish delight, and the way in which these are arranged on windowsills at home, on shelves at school, indicates the sheer volume that he collects. The alliteration in wait and watch highlights the excitement and the fascination that the life cycle of the frog has for him at this time, as the fattening dots burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. The speaker then goes on to explain how Miss Walls, presumably his primary teacher, would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. Note the polysyndeton used to link the simple sentences here. The repetition of how to evoke the simplistic language employed by the teacher to make the lesson accessible to very young children, and the enjambment, which suggests the way in which a child would recite the lesson that had been learned. It is also an indication that the speaker's fascination ended abruptly during childhood, as his language has not evolved to describe the process in more sophisticated terms. Furthermore, this polysyndeton adds to the sense that life is very clear and simple at this age, without the nuanced grey areas which come to characterise adult understanding. The use of the words daddy and mammy to refer to the male and female frogs anthropomorphises them to describe them in terms of family relationships, which the children would understand without the need to refer to sexual reproduction, and which makes them seem benign or gentle and kindly. The young speaker also seems to have taken much delight in the fact that you could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in sun and brown in rain. The first line of the second stanza is inset slightly, and if we look carefully, we notice that the last line of the first stanza has 2 syllables, while this first line of the second stanza has 8. In this way, Heaney provides a visual break within the 2 stanzas to signal a change in tone and mood, while simultaneously maintaining the iambic pentameter. You may have noticed in your studies of Shakespeare that he often splits lines of iambic pentameter between different speakers in the same way. The tone and mood become ominous, as one hot day when fields were rank with cow dung in the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flax-dam. The adjective rank means having a foul or offensive smell, which seems now to disgust rather than enchant the speaker. The frogs are still personified, but they are now angry and have invaded the flax-dam, as though on some kind of military campaign. The way in which the speaker ducked through hedges suggests he feels the need to protect himself in some way from the coarse croaking that he had not heard before. The onomatopoeic croaking is enhanced by the guttural alliteration of the k sounds. Once more, the speaker perceives the air as having substance to it, in that it is thick with a bass chorus, or filled with the very low sounds of the frogs croaking in unison. But this time the sound is threatening, like a battle cry, and appears as though it is also some kind of defensive barrier. Right down the dam gross-bellied frogs were cocked on sods. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. Some hopped. The slap and plop were obscene threats. The meanings and connotations of Heaney's diction here are all unpleasant. The frogs are gross-bellied or fat, and they seem to be cocked. If you cock a gun, it means that you have readied it for firing, so they appear to be poised for attack. Their throats are loose, floppy and throbbing as they pulsed like sails, this simile perhaps alluding to a flotilla of warships, such as the Spanish Armada. The way in which they are hopping about makes revolting sounds like slap and plop, which the speaker perceives as obscene or offensive and repugnant threats. These lines employ plosive b and p sounds, sibilant s sounds, guttural g and k sounds, assonant short o sounds, and onomatopoeia, to create an effect that is dissonant or harsh and jarring, which corresponds with the revulsion he is now feeling. He continues, "Some sat, poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting." A grenade is a small hand-held weapon which is triggered, usually by pulling out a pin, before being thrown. The simile, poised like mud grenades, then, suggests that he feels they are about to launch themselves at him in an attack. The greeny-brown colour evoked by the word mud is not only suggestive of the actual colour of grenades, but also implies that his fascination with these frogs is now at an end. Farting, which is used to describe the way in which he perceives their croaking to be disgusting and dissonant, is something that young children often find very amusing. But here we can see that he feels repulsed instead, and this is perhaps another indication that he is growing up. He sickened, turned and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance. The benign descriptions from the first stanza of the frogs as Daddy and Mammy have been replaced by great slime kings. They are now the rulers of the flax-dam, composed of slime with all its unpleasantly viscous and slippery connotations, who have gathered to wreak vengeance, presumably on the hapless children who dare to steal their frog-spawn. The speaker's initially very tactile delight in the thick, warm slobber of the frog-spawn has vanished. He now no longer has the desire to touch it, as I knew that if I dipped my hand the spawn would clutch it. The final image is almost like a scene from a horror movie, as he is convinced that the individual eggs of the frog spawn are going to consolidate into some kind of amorphous blob-like creature which will clutch at his hand, presumably to drag him under. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.